Our next tutorial will be about more advanced stitches that we use for embroidery, and one of which is a kind of a variation of our chain stitch. It's like individual little loops. So what if you only want to have one of those loops and not, that many? So I can show you how to do that. It's very easy. It's basically, wherever you want to have the loop, you come out with your needle here. So we make our chain loop, and you remember, you come out here and you go back into the same hole, and then depends on how big your chain or your loop you want to have. So I'll just choose a bigger one this time. So I will just come out here. I want to make the loop really big, and as you see, my needle was on top of my thread, so I pull it here. And don't pull too hard, because if you pull too hard, you just have two parallel lines here. So if it's too tight, it doesn't look that good. So now I have my thread here at the end, and I will just go over my loop and go back into the same hole. So I hold that thread in place where it is. And if you go really tight, you cannot see that little loop that I just did, that end loop, to hold it in place. So now I come out next to my first one to make a second one. Let's do that here. And again, I loop my thread just to have the visual, thing that where my thread is going. I go into the same hole, and then I come out at the bottom, like depending on how long you want to have your loop. It's about here. So I come out here, I have my thread underneath. And then I pull, and not too hard. Don't pull too hard. We don't want things to really be too tight. And so my thread gets a little tired looking here. That's okay. So I have that loop, and now I go around that freshly created loop and attach it. And I make another one just for the sake of it. I come out here. Go around into the same hole, and then depending on how long your loop should be, come out here, and I'm on top of my thread, so the thread is underneath. Funny. Sometimes you have to rearrange your things a little bit and wiggle. Like for me, it's all like that. Wiggling is sometimes really helpful. It looks a little weird. So then I fix that. And so on and so on. So this is also a great way to make little flowers. Like for example, you start somewhere. You want a little leaf facing down towards me. Oops. So I fix that into place. I come out at the center of it again, maybe slightly over, and I do a little loop to the right. That means I go into the same hole and I come out on the right side this time. I fix that. So when you do flowers, you know, that's really a basic stitch for anything natural, flowers, botanical, floral, you know, like this is used a lot in that theme. Then I make a loop to the top, meaning I stitch back into the same hole, but where I come out, that defines where the loop is going. On top of my thread, I fix that flower, and then I make another one here on the left side. So I loop that around, go in the same hole, and do my left flower. Okay. And then I go in and fix it. Okay, so just see that this is not a happy looking loop here. Now better. So that would be a detached chain loop that you do in variations, you know, and they can be really fun if you have multiples of them in another flower, in another leaf, in another color maybe, and so on. So you really can build that up very nicely. Our next stitch we want to work on is the feather stitch. And the feather stitch is a stitch that looks like it has a spine in the middle and then little lines, little feathers sticking out in a diagonal line. And so you can define like the width of the whole stitch and the length of the individual feathers and how many feathers you want. So that's all into, you know, you can do a lot of variations on that. And I show you just the basic stitch here. I aim for a width that is about the same as this little flower here. And I just come out with at the end of the flower, like here. So this I will consider to be number 1. So this point where I come out is number 1. Then the next point over will be the end point of my feather, that is number 2. And then the spine will be down from number 1 in a straight line. So this will be a straight line looking a little like a back stitch. So the way to do the feather stitch is from coming out at number 1, you go into number 2, and that is basically diagonally down from number 1. So just in a straight, you know, like straight down and over, like in a almost 90-degree angle, straight down and then over. That will be my number 2. And as I said before, I aim for the width of the flower. So then I will put my needle in there at number 2, and then the next consideration is number 3. That is basically where my spine is, but it will be a little further down from number 2. So almost like we have a triangle here. And I'll show you before I pull it all the way through. So this is number 1. This is number 2 where we go in. And this is number 3 that is below number 1. So it should be, oops, I have to be one more over. As I said before, in a straight line, although you can do variations later on as much as you want. So these are my 3 points here for that stitch. Then I will put my thread underneath the needle. This always ends up with a straight line from here to there, you know, from number 1 to number 3. So this will end up in a straight line, and that's exactly what I want. So I will pull that through. So we have our first feather basically. So now my next one will be to the right side. And that's what I do. I go from here, from my number 3, I go straight over to here, like straight over to the outside edge of my flower. Because as I said, I want it about the same width as my flower. I think about like having my spine straight here. So that means my next point, this is number 4, so my next point, number 5, has to be down here somewhere in the middle. And I want about the same feather direction as I have here on the right, on the left side. I want that on the right side. So that's what I aim for with my needle here, finding the point 5 where I come out from my work. And you can see, you know, like this is 1, 2, 3, and then 4, 5. And again, we have the thread below the needle. So that continues our straight line here in the middle. Okay, we put that in. So then we go from number 5, we go over to the left side again and get my needle in. So this will be number 6, and I go straight over here, straight over to number 6, and then along the spine straight down, that will be my number 7 then. With the thread underneath the needle. Then from here I go straight over to 8, and I find my middle point here, number 9, get the thread below the needle, pull it a little bit, and again go to the outside straight down here. Then find your middle point. Oops, so much fabric underneath. Again, have the thread underneath and pull it. And to end it, you know, the same thing. You don't want to just let it hang loose and whatnot. You want to have a nice ending where the last stitch will stay perfectly right there. That means you just loop around that last thread here and go to the back. So that is called a feather stitch. And you can see it can be kind of soft and almost like painted. It can also be very rigid and very tight together, and then it gets a more geometric look. So that's also really nice. Like I like the geometry in you know, in embroidery, and there are like really nice, interesting variations to it. So I will just finish off my thread here in the back, so it's no loose endings, because it's too short to use in anything else. So I go 3 times around the thread that I have, and then I push them together kind of in a knot, and I go into that knot and just pull it through. So I create basically a second knot here in the back, and then I cut it short. So my next stitch is called the herringbone stitch, and I have no idea why, but in German we call it Hexenstich. That means witch's stitch, and don't ask me why. I have no idea. So I come out here in the middle. I just do a half a row of that. So I'll go from the left to the right, but whatever is more comfortable for you or what you prefer. So the witch's stitch or the herringbone stitch is basically a cross stitch where we only have the crossings at the end of the legs, and kind of a little tricky to explain, especially English is not my native language, so I have a hard time like describing things, and so best is to just watch what I'm doing. So my number 1 point is where I come out with my thread. Then I decide how high I want to have that stitch to be. So I don't want to go too high, but also big enough so it's easy for you to see. And like I just go like about, I think about a square, maybe 10 and 10 thread counts. So if I go 10 and 10, so that will be basically the square that I'm thinking about. And so I go in number 2, and then I will go backwards a few stitches. So number 1 is here, number 2 is the outside, and 3 is where I come out again from behind my fabric. So I have this diagonal stitch now, but then I ended up left of my diagonal side. So I will create a similar thing now at the bottom. So I go over here thinking about the square, and then go back the same amount of stitches. Like I have 4 stitches that I go back. So again, I was diagonal, I go back, and now I'm here again for the same on the top. I come over here, and then I go kind of diagonal back. With this stitch, it's pretty easy, you know, it's kind of not over, you don't have to wrap the thread around anything, or, you know, it's a very basic, straightforward stitch, and it goes pretty fast. And as I said before, it's like many of those stitches, very decorative. And do another one. Since it's so close to the hoop or the loop, and I go to the back. So the last one here. So that is the herringbone stitch. A very simple stitch, and I like it. It has something geometric to it, and that's, yeah, I really like that. Okay, I will finish off that one. As you see in the back, there's not much in the back from that herringbone stitch. It's like only a few of those here, you know, which is kind of interesting. And because I want to have black on black, I don't want to go through any other color. I do the same thing with that one little loop. Just go around 3 times, push those 3 loops that I just created together, and then kind of just stitch through the knot. And then tighten it and cut it. Voila. This is kind of a nice stitch. Now the next stitch that I wanted to show you is straight stitch. And the straight stitch is very interesting because there are lots of variations to it. The straight stitch is just a plain straight stitch as it's named for. And I will do that from the center to from this middle point here to the outside. And this is basically, you come out at one point and you go back, at the other end. So now what you can do is come out at that point again and go over, and that point again and go over. That will create a lot of thread in the back, because every stitch you do is basically diagonal in the back, so you need a lot of embroidery thread for that. Another possibility would be to go back in here and come out right next to it in a straight line versus diagonal. So then you go back in this side and come back the same side. So this really saves a lot of embroidery material. And I will show you the back side of it in a sec. Let me do a few more stitches before I turn it around. And you see that we really have a minimal amount of embroidery thread in the back for this stitch if we do it that way. So if you look, so this is my knot from the beginning, and I just have tiny little stitches here and there. It's almost the same as for our herringbone stitch, but we have a lot of thread in the front. That's what we want. We don't want to put all our embroidery thread in the back. Since the stitches are so close together, it's pretty easy. I don't have to count. I just go over with my needle and I see the straight line here. It's very easy to do that way. The closer the stitches are together, the easier it is. And if they are further away, you always have to count or, mark your work really well. And that gets kind of very labor intense from time to time. So I'd rather spend my time stitching and sewing and embroidering. So it looks a little boring that way, which I can understand because it is pretty boring if you leave it the way it is. But then there are like variations that you can think about doing. I'll show you in 1 second. Let me just make a few more. It always looks better if you have multiples. one stitch that you can use with a straight stitch is also like changing the direction. That's another possibility. Like let's say you start like here, and then you go like diagonal, and just imagine you have a like a circle or something. And just make sure that all your stitches are the same length, that they have a cohesive look. So you get the idea. So because all of those stitches come out at the same hole, I have to go back kind of diagonally to get into my next hole. So, you know, just imagine going all the way around. I'll finish that a little later and, you know, do something round. So all of a sudden that straight stitch gets a very interesting look to it. So for that next variation, I want to bundle them together in groups of 3. And that means I will come out from the back at the second one because I want to bundle 3. So I come out at this second one, basically at the center here. So it's very close to the second one. But I do get my needle over around the first one. So it's a little hard to see. So my exit point is underneath the second one, but the needle pokes out to the first one. So that is how you start, because I decided to bundle 3 of them. So I get my thread up here. Then I loop it around 3 of those threads that I said before. I want to bundle 3. And then I go back into the same hole that I came out. So I just group 3 of them together. And before I always said, you know, don't pull too hard, don't be too, you know, strong. But for this one, we need to pull. And we will just pull them together. And that has a kind of a nice pretty look. It's almost like a little ribbon. So then we go into number 3, 4, 5. So the 5th one, which is the second one of the next bundle. So we come out here, but we will go around our 4th one. So we are underneath the 4th one. And then we pull out here. There's a little thread. Where does that come from? My knot. It's interesting to fix those little surprises. Okay, so I started this bundle in the center of the 3, you know, and then I come around, go around all 3 of them and go back into the same hole. And again, this one I have to really like put together, or, you know, cramp together, pull the thread really good. Go around my number, the first one of my bundle. And this is especially pretty when it's with two different colors. So I go 3 and then back into my hole of that one. So here you can see like those bundles, which are very pretty. I love those. I like that stitch. Okay, I'll do the last one too. So we have them all the same. And you can do more than 3. It's just at one point, you know, it gets a lot of tension on your material and your fabric. So depends on also how long your stitches are, how far apart they are. So you can do variations, but don't be too extreme. You'll see, you know, always try your ideas first and then see how it works. There are lots of considerations into that. So these are the bundles that I have. And yeah, I like that look. Now I can just continue here a little bit, put some of those in-betweens that maybe are a little shorter or longer than the other ones. So there are endless possibilities to do things and to embroider and to experience. And it doesn't always end up in little flowers and bees and whatnot. Like I will show you a few pictures of my favorite embroidery artists, and they do magnificent work. Like really, oh my God. I will post a separate post for that because I'm really a big fan. I have some that I follow and they are great artists. Very creative. So you see, you know, you can really like play and be creative with that. Okay, then the next stitch is a very unknown one that lots of people know and which is not a big thing to make a separate tutorial, is this satin stitch. That is a very closed together stitch where you can fill like surface areas really well. And this is basically a straight stitch but very close together. So let me just show you. Just go here and then over in the next thread. So I really have them very close together. So I only have them one thread apart each other. And fill up that whole fabric. I don't want to see anything of that fabric left. And sometimes you have to go over like twice to fill up everything. But most or best would be to use a thick enough thread that is thicker than the weave of your fabric, and then you can fill it up really well. Okay, a few more and then I'll show you closer. Okay, so I'll just show you now. So it is really tied together, and it doesn't necessarily have to be straight. You know, you can also do diagonal. That's totally up to you. It depends on the rest of your work and what you plan for it and what else you want to do. So then another one that I really like is the French knot. And this is basically a cute little thing that I will show you right here. The next stitch I wanted to show you is the French knot, and I really like it because it's kind of like, it has a nice sensation when you touch it. So I really like it, just not only for the touch, but also you can put dots around your work, or enhance like a center point of a little flower or something. So it is a really sweet little thing. The way to do it, you come out of your fabric exactly where you want the knot to be, and then you put your needle close by where you are, and then you wrap around the thread like 2 or 3 times. I wouldn't do more than that because it gets really big and fat and then a little hard to do. So, and you hold that tension here. That is very important. Don't let go. So you hold that tension, and then you stitch in back into your fabric right next to where you came out. And then you pull your needle back, and without losing that tension, so I still hold that fabric that that thread that I wrapped around, and then I pull the needle in the center through my knot, and very slowly get the rest of the thread through it. So I always hold that tension, and then when I'm done, I kind of give it a little tug at the end. When you do hand sewing, so you mainly use the running stitch and the back stitch. So these are really good for sewing. These are sturdy. They make the material really like hold together or something. I always have things to do. That's what my husband calls, oh, you and your projects. So yes, it's me and my projects. I love it. Okay, thank you.